This segment was made possible by Catholic Charities of the Diocese of Arlington, which is funded in part by the Bishop's Lenten Appeal. We thank all who support this critical appeal and the ministries it funds. You're listening to Searching for More, a podcast of the Diocese of Arlington. On this episode, if you believe people deserve a chance at redemption, then you'll want to hear what one counselor is doing to help ex-offenders find their way back into society. For starters, they don't go home right after jail. Instead, they move into a home for recovering addicts, then dive headfirst into a rigorous program.
What they end up realizing is, I'm not this big clump of damaged goods. I'm not this loser. I am someone who went through something that was very traumatic. I didn't have the same opportunity to develop the tools needed for adult life as I should have, but now I have that opportunity, and it's up to me to take that road.
This episode's host is Billy Atwell, Chief Communications Officer for the Diocese.
Bev, thank you for joining me on the podcast.
Great to be here.
So we've got a really interesting topic. I think this is an interesting topic because people don't know that much about the life of people coming out of prison, what they've experienced, their background, the context around some of those things. And there's also some concern about, well, how do you balance, the love that we should have for them with the conviction of the fact that there is justice and there's consequence to what we've done and those kinds of things. So I'm really looking forward to dig into that. Before we go there, though, just talk a little bit about, who you are, were you raised in the faith, where you go to church and those kinds of things.
So actually, I am an import to the Catholic scene, but for 30 plus years. I grew up in a home that had a very strong faith focus. My father actually was a Baptist minister, and I am deeply indebted. He is no longer here. I'm deeply indebted because living with him was like getting a doctorate in biblical studies. Those Baptists, they're
of course
very knowledgeable
yes.
about Scripture. And so, and then when I was in my early 30s, I had a very clear sense that God was really calling me into the Catholic community. And so here I am. That's my background in that way. In terms of, I also have done quite a bit of work that overlaps faith communities, actually all my adult life, but I taught at a Christian institute in Africa for 2 years in Kenya and had students from mostly all over East Africa, but some West African students as well. And that was an amazing experience. And then worked for 8 years with a homeless program in D.C. that was faith-based. Really, that population was the same as the population I'm working with now. They almost all of them had done time. Almost all of them were in recovery from some form of addiction. And it was a residential program. It was a wonderful program that really offered a lifeline to people who needed it. So when I started working on this aspect of the Catholic Charities of Arlington Diocese, the post-prison program, it was kind of like coming home, really, to the same population. I was immediately felt very in sync with who they are, and so it was a good match.
Took away a little of the learning curve.
Yes,
I guess.
Right.
So you're a licensed clinical social worker.
Yes.
Describe what that is, because if we hear therapist, so we kind of know what that means. What does that mean?
So my training actually incorporates a big chunk of what a person would gain if they pursued graduate studies in psychology. What I really appreciate about the social work approach, so I have a master's in social work, a master's in communications as well, but what I deeply value about this approach is it really looks holistically at the person. It isn't as much sort of stuck in what's going on in their minds right now, what's going on in their emotions right now. This would be look at them vertically and laterally. Vertically meaning what was their childhood like? What kind of time bombs were planted, in a sense, in their childhood, which is not to impugn parents, because sometimes it may be, suppose a mother has heart issues and is bedridden for many years, and the children end up being the surrogate mom for each other. It has an effect, and not to mention in this country we have huge issues with broken families, family brokenness, which leaves huge wounds that are often invisible, that need to be dealt with and lead to other issues if they're not dealt with. So my training equips me to do that.
So as a licensed clinical social worker, how do you approach it differently than someone would if they were working for like a secular organization or entity? Obviously, being Catholic and working with Catholic charities, how does that modify the professional nature of your work?
Right. So I actually have a private practice in Virginia with a group who are all fully licensed by the state of Virginia, but also who all have a very strong faith component. Now, what does that mean? It means that we're very comfortable approaching a person holistically, and that is, there is a lot of research that shows that a strong faith kind of inoculates you from other issues. It doesn't take them away, but it's a predictor of a smoother marriage journey, of higher satisfaction in marriage, of more tools to deal with anxiety and depression, or to avoid them totally, but to bounce back if those issues are a problem. Tools for relationship. Anyway, there's a lot of research, including for teenagers, that if parents have issues with teenagers, frankly, number one, get them into a strong faith community. Which doesn't mean just drop them at church on Sunday, Mass, or if they're Protestant church service, but to become active themselves and also help them engage in a great youth group and other types of programs that will encourage their faith. Because if the parent really just cares about basic parent issues like grades and so on, a strong faith is a predictor that a child's grades will go up, that their resistance to depression and anxiety will go up, that they will be more resistant to risky behaviors, drugs, alcohol, sex, and that they will rise in leadership, partly because they're not as vulnerable to the crowd, because they have more internal security. So I am marinated in all of this research, and the reason is I know that this component makes a big difference in life, and a person who's coming at these issues purely from a secular perspective often is either uncomfortable talking about it, uncomfortable dealing with it, or doesn't believe it perhaps in the first place. So what happens if a person of faith walks into their office? They really don't know quite how to handle the entire person, and that's the difference. That would be the difference. Now, can I push my belief system on people? No, that would not be considered appropriate, and it could actually have negative outcomes. But 99% of the people I see are not only from faith communities, but actually quite serious about their faith. So for them, they would feel it's a loss and a disconnect if we don't consider those aspects of how they can gain strength and recover from various issues in their lives.
Well, it seems like it would be addressing somebody's physical ailments without ever thinking about nutrition. You know, like what's feeding this person? There's all these symptoms, there's all these things that can happen, but it could be that they're just malnourished, or they, are eating too much of the wrong thing or too much of this thing.
Or at least you have to consider it. Just think about if you don't have vitamin D, just one small little thing, and you're it throws you off. And the same is true with this as well. If people come to my office and they're struggling with a big issue in their marriage, for example, one of the first things I'll say, since they inevitably are faith people, is I encourage them to get involved in a strong men's group and a strong women's group in their own church or parish. Why is that? Because, and I will say to them, you'll save yourself time and money coming to see me. And the reason is it just sort of naturally begins to recalibrate a person by meeting on a regular basis with others who are seeking a balance in their lives through spiritual vitality. And so it affects everything else. It just naturally does. Conscience, think about it. Conscience, communication, all of those factors. If you're really growing in your faith, you get a sort of little poke in the conscience when you start to do something that's actually wounding.
So this program that you are a part of or leading, whatever it is, with these men that have come out of jail or prison, talk about what that program is and what it entails.
So this is a program that Catholic Charities has kind of revitalized in the past year in several ways. One is, they discovered that many of these people coming out of prison, men and women, have a harder time finding housing than jobs. Because what happens when you try to rent an apartment? You've got to show a history of income. How do you do that if you've been getting 17 cents an hour at the local jail. That didn't quite work.
License plates or something.
And so one thing is that Catholic Charities will cover just briefly for a few weeks housing in what is called the Oxford House through an arrangement made with the Oxford House. The Oxford House is really a secular organization that has houses in normal neighborhoods all over the country where people go for recovery purposes. It's really like an old halfway house. They have an amazing success rate, partly because all of these Oxford houses are organized by the people who live in them, men and women. Very robust organization in terms of they all have to do chores, take care of the houses, pay the rent on time, and if they relapse, they're out, and often within 30 minutes. So it's a very strict regimen, but it's from peers. It's not some outsider telling you blew it. It's peers saying, these are the rules, and we have to stick to the rules for this to work. So Catholic Charities made an arrangement with Oxford House to cover several weeks of rent per person coming out. That gives them a little breather.
Yeah.
So then they have to start paying their own rent within several weeks. That means they have to get a job. And that often means they cannot wait for the perfect job. That's just not going to work. Mm-hmm. They've just got to get moving. But therapeutically, that's better anyway. That puts them in a better state of mind when they're being more self-sufficient, more productive, when they're getting out in the community, not just sitting in a house worrying about, I don't have a job, the best job, a great job. So those components. Now, the Catholic Charities program encourages connection with a faith community, so that's part of it as well. It's not required, it's encouraged as part of what's going to help them get wind under their wings more quickly. My role is that I am going into a particular Oxford house, but people can come from other locations as well, and meeting with the guys there who are in the Catholic Charities program and others and peers whom they invite as well, to work on resilience, really. Resilience that has to do with emotional calibration, with better tools for communication and conflict management. Think about it in jail. How do they solve conflict? Not a great zone to learn good conflict management skills.
I can imagine, yeah.
And so, and now I'm moving into a sequence that will be kind of wrapped around Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And but each component will be several weeks so for example, right now we're on habit 2, which is begin with the end in mind. And the point is, if you don't set the right goals, you may take initiative and be heading in the wrong direction.
Right.
Very efficiently.
Right.
So this week, for example, we'll be looking at core relationships. What we do with our hearts determines so much of our lives. But we don't learn this in this country. Typically, we don't learn it at home. We often don't learn it at church. How do you think about the kind of person who has the character traits that are going to be good for the long journey, who's faithful, who is emotionally calibrated and doesn't just fly off the handle at the smallest little thing, whose faith is a part of their strength, who basically is the kind of person you don't want to share a journey with? So we'll be talking about, first of all, what is the history? What kind of person have you tended to be attracted to? How'd that work?
Yeah.
Often not so well. So what kind of person would you like to be attracted to in terms of these qualities? And by the way,
by attracted to, you mean like emulate? Like who would you want to emulate?
I mean, first of all, what do you do with your heart, let's say romantically? Most of them aren't married. They might have been. Mm-hmm. They hope to be married. But now is a good time before they get committed to some serious relationship, which most are not, to think about what you're doing. I mean, think about in this country how many people wish they had done this.
Oh, yeah.
Well, for these guys, this is an opportunity to save themselves a lot of grief. It's just such a basic life decision. It affects so much in our lives. Our emotional life, our financial security, our relationships, even jobs, and what about children? If you marry someone who's a powder keg, how's that going to work?
Yeah.
So thinking about that, we'll look at finances in terms of financial habits that bring stability, and we will look at parenting. Some of them have children, and then others wish to have. So what do you look for 20 years from now with a child, or 10 years from now? Yeah. Not just how do you feed a baby.
Right, right.
Because there's so many things that can make such a difference that are very practical and not rocket science, but you don't do it if you don't know.
Yeah. What are the kinds of crimes that they've committed, and how long have their stays in jail or prison been before they come to Oxford House and are part of your program?
So the Catholic Charities program screens out violent offenders and sex offenders. Okay. And so the guys and women in this program have not committed those crimes. Often the crimes are drug related or thefts. Okay. And so and they may have done months or several years, and they may have been in more than once. But I'm in an Oxford House, surrounded by people who are right out of jail. Mm-hmm. So why would I feel secure? I have spent a lot of years with this population, and frankly, I feel safer with them than plenty of streets in America. Yeah. Where people are not in jail. So and
they're also not seeking the help, right?
Right.
The recidivism in this country, I don't remember what the percentage is, but it's extraordinarily high. Most people that are in prison go back to prison. That is the tragic statistic. And those people are out walking about. They're with you in the shopping malls. They're in the car next to you. These are not people that are kind of segregated to some corner that you never have to see. These are people that are around you. If these are the people that are seeking help, they're, I would think, the lowest risk of a former offender.
Yes, and the other factor connected to that is, what is our philosophy here as a nation, as a society? Do we want to warehouse people for years in what ends up being boot camp for more crime? Is that what we want to do? Or do we want to use prison as an opportunity for personal development? So there are programs such as the Hudson Link is a college program that's going gangbusters in New York State. There are 500 some guys in prison in New York State who are in this college program. And one of the biggest engines of the program is a guy who did 16 years, sentenced to 24, did 16 for murder. In his case, he was a teenager. He made a big mistake. And he thought he was eliminating someone who was molesting his friend. So that was the background. But, you're 16, you don't have the prefrontal cortex yet, not a smart move. And he ends up in prison. But while he was there, he finished his high school, college, and 2 grad degrees. And now he's head of this program. He was hired back by the prisons of New York. Wow. To head up this prison program in the state because he was so remarkable. And now all these other guys, people can Google it, and just with a 5-minute video, you'll get such a different view of who they are.
I always find it ironic when we call it the correction system. Like, what's being corrected? Like,
no, not much.
The phrase is kind of again ironic, and I think there's a normal sense of justice of, you don't want to go to prison, then don't commit a crime, and there's a sense to which that's true, of course, but we also have to decide: do we want to punish people and then likely just do all of this again and end up in prison again if they get out, if their crime wasn't so heinous that they were able to get out,
right?
Or do we want this to end? Do we want this cycle to be over? The rate at which our country is having to build prisons is crazy. I used to work for a prison reform organization. We did public policy. I remember researching at one point, this is years ago, but the state of Michigan, 20% of its discretionary budget went to the prison system. Can you imagine what could happen with that? And it's not like Michigan wasn't needing the money.
Right.
Michigan's been struggling for a long time. 20% of the discretionary budget went to the prison system, and it was still going up. The reason we were there is because there was bipartisan interest in this being over. Republicans wanted the money for other things. They're like, there's got to be a more economical way, and the Democrats were looking at saying there's got to be a more sensible form of justice to this. So there was a kind of neat meeting of the minds there for a little bit. When you look at the lives of these guys and their backgrounds, how much of that plays into them having committed crimes, and how much of it is some other factor? Maybe it's genetic, just chemical imbalance, just like he's talking about impulse control, and just sin. I mean, how much of it do you think is nature versus nurture and all that?
Well, this is a heartbreaker, frankly, because overwhelmingly people in our prisons come from a lot of childhood trauma. It may be violence in the home, either towards them or watching the parents beat up each other. It may be addiction in the home, the parents addicted. So then you've got a lot of neglect and abuse. And it may even be factors such as, there are a lot of people, of course, whose parents were divorced and they don't end up in jail. But divorce is a huge catastrophe for a lot of kids. I think we sometimes whitewash it a bit too much. So, of course, I work with people who are getting divorced, who are divorced. I have relatives who have been, who doesn't. So this is not to somehow characterize people who've been through that heartache in a negative way. The point is we have to be realistic about the price that's paid for the little guys, for the young ones, for the children or teenagers. It tends to be just this huge sea change in their lives. They often don't know who to trust, or they're used as weapons by the parents against the other parent, or they find themselves, the parents are in a big crisis, so they often are not very emotionally available. So this can be the turning point where a lot of kids turn to their peers for family and security, and boy, those peers had better be stable, or right there is one way this gets off track. So one of the things I work with right away is on kind of looking back at the family history, because the point isn't to look back and blame parents, grandparents, whoever. The point is to look back and understand. It's not so much what's wrong with me, it's what happened to me. Because once we can see the damage that was done emotionally, psychologically, or just in terms of basic maturation, we have more clarity how to move forward. And this is rooted in both research and biblical concepts. Moses himself said, take a good look at the family tree, because as you get clarity, you invite God's blessing. Now that's Leviticus 26:40 through 45 for anyone who wants to look it up. But the Bible is just loaded with all these practical. Yes, I was. Yes, I was. So I mean, so much of this really is in sync with what Scripture says about emotional calibration. And
seems like it speaks to their dignity too, that it's not who I am, it's what I did or it's what happened to me that influences this, that kind of restores a sense of who they are as a child of God, again invoking the faith element more than the secular.
I think what this process does is help rewrite the autobiography, meaning that, okay, so these events happened in my family, all right, he or she already knew that. But what was the significance for this person? And what they end up realizing is, I'm not this big clump of damaged goods. I'm not this loser. I am someone who went through something that was very traumatic. I didn't have the same opportunity to develop the tools needed for adult life as I should have. But now I have that opportunity, and it's up to me to take that road. At a certain point, you can't just look back and blame. You have to take stock of your situation. Just as if you went to a doctor and he said, you have diabetes. Okay, so you have diabetes. Maybe it's because your mom did feed you too much sugar, but it's not going to help anything to blame her. You just have to start choosing some choices yourself if you're going to be healthy. It's really similar.
Yeah. Is there a real lack of self-confidence amongst a lot of the guys that you work with? I
would say pretty huge.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there are some who have quite a bit of confidence and are doing well. Others are, they do feel like that the label is just this huge load. And it is. It's probably not as much of a load as they think it is, because if they start moving, and especially now, there are a lot of employers who are very hungry for employees. And by the way, anyone listening to this, would you please call Catholic Charities of the Arlington Diocese and sign up for this program of employers, because what we offer is sort of a screening process. We've done the screening. These are not people who have a violent or sex abusing history, and we will work with employers to help them feel secure. And there are employers signing up.
Because you've got a vested interest in these guys not breaking the rules too, and hiring, being hired by somebody and then stealing, because that looks bad on the program. You want to make sure that they're getting people who are, credible and on the right track and all those kinds of things. So the guys that come to the Oxford House that you work with, have they come directly from prison and jail, or have some of them gone elsewhere and then come to the program?
Generally, right from jail. They go to bed in jail one night and go to bed at the Oxford House the next night.
Because I would imagine that's pretty critical. Otherwise, they're going to probably go back to the environments that they were sent to jail from.
Well, and think about it. A lot of these families are not real thrilled to bring them back home. Yeah, because maybe the families have paid a big price through all of this. Maybe multiple addiction crises, jail crises, the court system. So sometimes the families feel very hostile and let them know, and that's not exactly good for getting back on track when every day you have to, be viewed as this giant failure in the family and someone who's caused a lot of chaos in the family. So when they're in this the Oxford House where I go particularly, they're surrounded with people who are in the same boat. They are understood. Nobody's saying you're such a loser, but the peers who will hold you accountable and also who will notice if you start slipping, they should be going to regular AA meetings, that kind of thing. You start noticing one of the guys is beginning to miss, they will call him out. They'll say, "Okay, buddy, come with me. You're going to get yourself in trouble." That's great.
Yeah, it is good. They also know that guy gets it.
Yeah.
Bev, I don't know that you've ever done a 20-year stint in jail or prison or anything like that. I assume you haven't.
No.
So it wouldn't connect for them maybe the same. Like it wouldn't be like, there might be this moment of doubt of, well, how would she know? She's never been where I've been or had these experiences. Well, these other guys have. These other guys have had the substance issues and were abused as a kid or whatever it might be. They can maybe connect at other times. It's like anything else in life. Someone who's been through it can help you, especially emotionally, and maybe in terms of motivation, because, they have had to do this. They have had to, leave jail or prison and start over.
Right.
And mend broken relationships with maybe a spouse or their children, whatever it might be. For someone who's listening and feels like we're kind of dancing around, the issue of justice, that when you do something really wrong, you steal from somebody, you're going to pay a price for it, and they feel like maybe it's being understated, but isn't giving enough credit to the fact that if we don't want people to go back to prison, we need to help give them the tools, like you're talking about, the ones that you're trying to equip them with to not go back. What would you say to that person that feels like we're maybe light-stepping the justice component?
Right. I understand that. I would say there are two extremes with the concept of forgiveness. One is the grudge addict who just won't let it go. And the other is cheap grace, saying, "Oh, well, it doesn't matter." Oh, actually, it does matter. And, there's also the biblical concept of restitution, that if I take something from someone, it's appropriate that I'm accountable. But think about that. Better that we have people work on jobs, even state jobs, working on the roads or whatever, until they pay the victim back than sitting in a prison. Think about it. I mean, we could be much more practical about how we go about this. Now, but the other factor here is, some people listening, it's their relative, their son, their daughter, their spouse, their parent who has done time. And they all have mixed feelings, too. Some of them may feel a lot of anger for the damage done to them, and some of them will have huge sorrow that no one will give this person a break. And so I just think, as a society, we just have to face the reality that if there's hemorrhaging going on in a big chunk of the population, who's that going to affect? It's going to affect all of us. So we have choices as a society. We can either say we're going to be part of the solution. We are not going to be passive. We are going to back options that are proving themselves to be effective and make a difference and give these people a lifeline so they can become protective. I want those guys to be taxpayers. Why should we spend millions and millions housing them in jails when they can be, channels of resources into the society?
Yeah, it's unjust and it's impractical.
It's very
to
impractical.
keep that going forever.
Right.
What do you think is the key difference between the guy who reaches out? So you're working out with people who are seeking the help and someone who doesn't. They get out of prison and maybe it's a lack of confidence, and they just figure, I'm just going to go back and hopefully I don't come back, and they do because they're still involved with drugs or alcohol or whatever it might be. What is the difference between the guy that actually wants the help, or gal that wants the help, and those who don't? Because the program's only going to be successful insofar as there are people that want it and that desire it and pursue it. It seems like it's two different almost species of people.
Yes,
there.
and there are two angles to that. It's one thing to want the help. It's another thing to be prepared to do the work.
Yeah.
Because that's really where the rubber meets the road. I mean, they need to show up at, let's say, these sessions, which they do. They need to go to the AA and other addiction groups on a regular basis, be really disciplined about it. If they get into a faith community, they need, show up, engage, get involved. Like one of the guys in my group was really became a Catholic in the spring officially, and also was invited to join the Knights of Columbus, which he did. He's getting involved, he's engaging, and he's being responsive when he's asked to do various projects with the Knights of Columbus. So for those listening, that's a Catholic men's group. That's really smart. So the ones who are not involved, they actually notice both groups. So I encounter both groups in the Oxford House, the ones who are engaged, the ones who aren't. And the ones who are engaged say, we don't know how we do this without the spiritual component. And one of them said, well, he was in jail locally here in Virginia, that he was looking at the ceiling and thinking, I have totally messed up my life. And so he said to God, I get it now. I'm really going to be in trouble without you, and I'm willing to do what you lead me to do. He's really done well. And then there are others too who have gotten very serious, often returning to a faith that they were exposed to when they were young. The other guys will say, they are curious. Like they'll say, you guys seem to have something going that we don't have going. Sometimes they end up in theological discussions at midnight with one group of guys fresh from jail explaining to the other guys fresh from jail what it means to have a relationship with Christ, for example, what it means to pray, what it means to seek God's help on this very difficult journey. But I also would like to remind people, what do the hungry and homeless and ill and prisoners have in common? They all were singled out from the top, from Jesus himself, as those worthy of our TLC. He said, if you will care for those, it's as if you're caring for me. This is a mandate. This isn't really maybe do it, maybe don't. We do, and of course, we do have to consider justice. That's legitimate. We do have to consider restitution, but what fools are we if we just let this population grow larger and larger and ever more risky to everyone else? That's just, that's on us if we let that happen.
And we're very quick to be, and very happy to help, clothe the naked, feed the hungry, give drink to the thirsty, but visit those in prison is kind of like the last group we'll even think about helping, and usually we're too tuckered out from all the other groups to really put any energy into it. What is it that someone that's listening that's on board, what can they do to help? Is there something that they can do? Do you need mentors? Is it just contributing to Catholic Charities to keep the program going? Do you need other counselors, or what is it?
They can call Catholic Charities and have a discussion about that. I would say that we do need mentors, people who will sort of walk alongside a person and meet with them, kind of like a sponsor in AA, and help them with some practical things. Frankly, I'd like to see a clothing bank get started, that so they can have nice, a nice suit when you get out, and things that other people have grown out of or just don't use anymore. Because one of the programs in New York, that's one thing that happens. The minute they're getting out, they go to this bank of used clothes so they can walk to a job interview looking spiffy.
Yeah.
And
again,
so
it speaks to the dignity. You feel good and confident.
Absolutely. And then we really need employers. I encourage you to think about it. Just today, I had a haircut. The person whom I've known for 20 years has a son who has a construction company. I said, will he hire guys out of Virginia State Prison? She said, you bet he will. And I said, I want his number. So I'm calling him as soon as I talk.
Even your hairdresser doesn't get off the hook.
No, I'm saying I am on the hunt.
That's good.
For employers who are willing to hire some really great guys.
So if you're one of those folks, please go to ccda.net. All the contact info for Catholic Charities is there. you can reach out via email or phone, whatever you want. But if you're one of those people that are willing to hire, please reach out. It's obviously a need. And if you're willing to mentor, I'm assuming they don't have to have any professional skills in this. It's just someone who's willing to walk with them.
That's right. And also donate. It costs money to pay for the housing and other aspects of it. It's really low budget, really. But we want to help as many as possible. So that's a big part, too.
Absolutely. Bev, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Thank you for listening to Searching for More. If you enjoyed this podcast, please write a review on iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. Also, make sure you follow the Diocese and the Arlington Catholic Herald on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And subscribe to our YouTube channels for regular videos that will inspire, educate, and inform you about the Catholic faith and our diocesan community.